Well, we'd like to welcome everybody this evening, and we're going to get started here directly with our program. We're so thankful to see you again, and welcome Select Sires crew. If the panelists could make their way this way, Shannon, Dawn, Kendall, Bill. We try to put these programs on to where, you know, I can learn something, and hopefully we can share that we all learn something together. And you know, we talk a lot about family and agriculture and all these things we do, and we think a lot in my family about a think tank. And when Dr. Randall and I were in school together all these years, and Kendall Hopp and I were in school together, I mean, this is kind of a lot of my think tank. A lot of you out there are my think tank too, because I need help and I need answers, and so this is not going to be all that structured. We've got plenty of microphones, and you know, if we say something that you want follow up on, and we're going to go as long as you would like to go, but I'm going to let Bill Bowman do the introductions. But these are, as all of you know, and you know these people very well, these are some of the finest friends a man could ever have, or a woman, and they know this business, and it's going to be interesting, and I'm excited to learn something tonight. So I'll give you Bill Bowman.
Thanks, Mark. It is a pleasure to be here and to be up here with this great group of folks. And I mean, Mark's idea was to try to get everybody an opportunity to learn from these people, and to try to just reiterate what you all are probably here for to start with, and in understanding how easy it is to create extra value using the right genetics, the right management, the right marketing, but to understand that our entire production system is built on these different portions of the industry working together, coordinating together, and trying to piece things together. And so we're, as Mark said, we want to keep it open. I think Deb and others have maybe got some other mics out here, so if somebody hears something, they want to have additional questions or comments, raise your hand, and we'll get somebody to get you a mic as well. But we're just going to start real informally, and again, a lot of times we think about genetics and maybe the seed stock world, but we're going to kind of do things backwards tonight, I think, Mark. And so we know the tremendous uptake from the consumer world of high quality beef, and we've all heard people talk about, well, we're going to overwhelm the market with upper end choice and prime beef, and that's been absolutely the opposite has occurred. And so I think we see more and more of that product being able to be produced, but we're selling more of it, there's more demand, and we're selling it for more money every day. And so I think, again, we're going to start, and first going to introduce Kendall Hopp, who is the manager at Shaw Feed Yards, just over here to the east. Kendall, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background real quick, and then we'll get into some questions.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Is that loud enough? We're in good shape? First off, I'd like to thank the Gardner organization for inviting us out here today. I think getting these things together and exchanging ideas is critical to our future success. And a little bit about myself, I grew up in McPherson, Kansas, cow-calf operation, farming operation, graduated K-State, like with Mark and Randall. We were lived in different locations, but went to the same school. Graduated, worked for IBP a little short time. It was a great experience. I worked as a carcass merchandiser at that time. Learned about, of course, the cuts of meat and different yield grades, quality grades, how they kind of operate, make sure things fit in the box, and then had an opportunity to go back home. Started at McPherson County Feeders, worked for a gentleman named Alan Sentz, It's about a 9,000 head commercial feed yard, and I learned everything there, from washing tanks to buying corn, and it was a great experience, great learning experience. Then I had opportunity to get with a proud organization, and then eventually met Bill Shaw when I was down at Ashland the first time, and it's kind of been history ever since. We have a nice little yard. It's about 6,500 head commercial feed yard. We feed a lot of high-end cattle. We do a lot of sorting. People, I'm not going to be the cheapest, but we try and merchandise them to their maximum potential, and it takes a good crew, and I'm blessed with that, and good people, and good neighbors, and good friends. It works well.
Great. So Kendall, as you look back over your 30 years in the cattle feeding industry, I mean, how have the genetics changed? How you manage and make profit of feed yard? How's that changed?
Well, when I first graduated in '83, I worked at, like I mentioned, at IBP, and if we graded 65% choice, man, we thought we were really doing well. Now they're grading 85% choice, and that's direct responsibility of what these guys are doing, and you guys are selecting for what's paying the bills actually. But certified Angus beef was a big doer in that, promoting, paying up on that quality into cattle, and you give the American rancher or farmer an incentive, he'll get there. And right now, I think it's $8 a hundred for certified Angus, and the choice spreads, I think, at $28, and primes it down to 32. But I say down to 32, it got to 55 last fall, and we had cattle making over $400 premium. That's what it's all about, because they don't take really that much more feed to raise that animal. The bottom line, get more money. That's what it's all about.
So, Kendall, I guess when you get cattle, what do you get that doesn't work? What do you need changed, or how do we make improvements on your end of the business and the cattle that you're getting?
Well, knowledge is the key, and just because they're black don't mean they're good either. We've got some other. I'm not just here to promote Angus by no means. There's good other breeds, and they'll pay back also. But the grid that we use US Premium, and it's set up for these type of cattle. 1,500-pound steer that, he'll make a 950,000-pound carcass. Grade choice or higher. A lot of times, mostly prime. A lot of you guys would be 40-50% prime, and that's kind of just they're making cattle bigger and better, and pounds pay the bills.
Great. I guess we'll kind of move through, and like I said, as people have questions or comments, we welcome them. Going to introduce in the center then Don Graham. Don, I'm sure a lot of you know, travels, about 1 million miles a year, Don, something like that. So Don is with Crossroads Cattle Company and does order buying across the country. And Don, I guess my question, I'll give you a second to kind of tell a little bit about your background and what you've done, and then I'll ask you the hard question.
Okay. With Crossroads Cattle Company, we're headquartered out of Austin, Texas. Leslie Callahan and Jennings Steen. We source primarily everything, cow-calf, or calves to yearlings. We sourced cattle out of 42 states last year. We do everything from commodity cattle to higher grade cattle to program cattle, NHTC, Natural Gap. I work a lot more in those type of cattle, either high grading type of cattle or program cattle. I guess that's kind of more my forte. It makes my job look a lot easier when I can sit there and put those kind of cattle in the yard, and instead of getting a phone call about a set of 9-weight yearlings that come in just commodity cattle and, as they say, fed like a sled brick.
So how have you seen things change or evolve while you've been doing this, Don, in terms of what brings money, what creates premium and extra value?
Well, a good friend of ours that passed away not too long ago, when I went to Crossroads 19 years ago from BC Natural Foods out of Golden, Colorado. At that point, we were looking at naturals, and at that point, all it had to be is affidavit. Buster Welch called me up and he says, "Hey, I've got 4 loads of cattle, 7 1/4 weight. And here's what makes this Gardner deal look good." And I'm not saying it because Mark's sitting here, but he prices these cattle to me. Didn't know Buster, and I'm sorry I didn't know Buster at the time, but I didn't, and I called the office. And we had basically had a go-get-em order for the natural cattle, and I told Jennings, you know, that I had 4 loads of 7 1/4 weights, but the best thing was they wasn't even weaned. And he was $20 over what we were buying weaned cattle for. And I went to explaining to Jennings that, you know, he said, where are these cattle at? And I said, Rotan, Texas. And he said, are they Buster Welch's? I said, yes, sir. He goes, you better buy them. He said, if you don't call him back and buy them, they're going to be gone. And I said, well, who's Buster Welch? Of course, I got a 30-minute lecture about that, too. I guess what I'm saying is genetics back then was very important, but they're even that much more important now, especially in program cattle, but in all grades of cattle. I mean, you look at the premiums that across the board. You made the comment about overflowing the high choice and prime. I've got a little supermarket over there at Southwest City, Missouri that I like to buy prime tenderloins from. And I have them sliced 1.5 inches. Last one I got was 6 or 7 weeks ago, and he told me he couldn't get any more. You know, so we're not saturating the prime and higher choice market. When you're dealing with program cattle, obviously they cannot have an implant. So I buy a lot of cattle for a outfit in South Dakota, but that's all they buy. And I buy cattle off Superior, Western, Northern, any of their video program cattle. And my job is to look through that catalog 2 or 3 days prior to the sale, pick out what we know as far as genetics, what genetics look like that we can deal with. If I've got a question on any of it, I always call the Superior rep, talk to him about them. If I can get carcass data back, any kind of feeding data back, any of that stuff, he's going to buy those cattle. If we don't have that, forget it. Simply because of the cost of grain today and the difference in the gain, if he's got those genetics to go along with it, then he's a lot more comfortable about buying them.
Kendall, do people like Don always send you the right kind of cattle?
Well, they try, I think. No one tries to send you a load of trouble, you know, and that's not good for them or us either. And that's the hope that we get through here. I mean, we're only as good as what you people send us. I can't make a silk purse out of sows here. I mean, make sure, I think nutrition, Randall and I go around about this all the time. I blame my dad's on Randall and he blames on my nutritionist, but well, that's another discussion, right? But I do think there's a lot about
the feed color.
Yeah, there you go. But I do think it's critical to have a good mineral program and some type of nutrition in those cattle, sometimes ground alfalfa or silage or something, get that gut kind of used to make the transition to our place makes a big difference. Because, like I say, if they're behind the eight ball when they get there, it's hard to get them racked up right.
So that's a good segue to our next guest, Dr. Randall Spare, which everybody in here knows. No, we're skipping around a little bit. I knew it wouldn't do any good to give you a script because you wouldn't follow it anyway. So,
Saving the best for last.
so Kendall talked about management, nutrition, things, getting these cattle ready to go. Tell us the secret recipe here.
Well, there's no secret. You know, a word that when we were all in college that we were in animal husbandry, or I guess that may have been my dad's time of animal husbandry was what we talked about, and so many times we've lost sight of that. But it's what you all do as far as cow-calf producers, and when we put it in simplistic forms. As cow-calf producers, we add value to our operations several different ways through obviously genetics. We can choose to use the genetics that are going to flourish. We do it through our nutrition program, and we do it through a health program, and we put it good facilities so the cattle handle correctly. When we do those 3 things or 4 things, and then we think about the future, who's going to own our cattle next? Not is this going to pay for itself? But how can we help the cattle succeed at the next zip code, whether we own them or whether somebody else owns them? And I'm sure we'll all get to talk about this, but this week, there was a set of steers that sold on the video. They weighed 900 pounds. They brought a little over $2. Well, those people have added value through genetics, through the health program, through their nutrition program, and the next people hopefully will succeed with them. They'll succeed in how they're programmed to perform. But those are the simplistic animal husbandry tools that are available today, and I think that if we have an eye on how are our cattle going to succeed for the next owner or the next zip code, they'll succeed at Kendall's place, and there's times that we have to tweak a few things, and our job as veterinarians has been to communicate with Kendall and his clients and say, let's do this at home before you bring them.
So Don, has that mentality changed recently in terms of people understanding that there is a next step consumer that's gonna have to make money with these cattle too? I mean, is that changing?
Yeah, it's changing, not as fast as I'd still like it to. You still have enough of that mentality, and I know Kendall doesn't have that, but a lot of yards have the mentality, I don't want to share that data back because they'll just use it to beat me over the head with it. We're getting to the point where I'm being able to get a lot more of the data back. I like to share that data back because it not only helps us, it's going to help us the next year when we sell those cattle. He can make improvements with those, with those scores coming back. We've got to open that two-way street a lot better. The health issue, it's neat for what I do, covering as big a territory as I cover. There's still areas of the country that you just can't get it through their head as far as, vaccination to them is a round of blackleg and maybe a band on them, maybe not, Whereas you go on up north, a lot in Kansas as well, Kansas north, northern Oklahoma north, you get into a lot better understanding of not only vaccination protocol, but mineral, the whole 9 yards. You get up, I buy a fair amount of cattle in South Dakota in the fall, during the fall run, and those Missouri barns want to know why I go up there and pay $20 more. Well, when those cattle land at my customer's place, they've got a vet-certified vaccination protocol that was done to those cattle. They're hardier. They've had an excellent mineral program while they was on the cow. And the health issues are, by the time you come out of southern Missouri or something like that and you put the dollars together, there's not a lot of difference. But I can sure sell the heck out of cattle a lot better when it comes off grass.
So next we'll introduce Shannon Wharton. Shannon and her husband, Rusty, run a commercial operation, and Shannon's had a lot of experience in the feed yard business, in managing feed intake systems and understanding cattle from both producing commercial cow-calf operation to retaining ownership and feeding those cattle. And so Shannon, give us a little history or background in addition to that on your past.
Well, I appreciate to sit up here with this panel. Feel a little underqualified, but anyway. I don't have a traditional background in agriculture. I actually grew up in Pennsylvania. My dad was a mechanical engineer. We had a couple horses growing up, and that was the extent of my ag knowledge. Went to Penn State, did my undergrad there, and like every other little young girl, thought I wanted to do something with horses and realized, hey, these cows are a lot more fun. I kind of like this. So looking at my job opportunities getting out of Penn State, it was back east, it was pretty much in sales, and I'm not a salesman. So I went to the University of Kentucky, did a master's degree in animal breeding, actually worked under the same major professor as Sally did, so that was kind of neat to come full circle when we got back together. Then looking at being around Kentucky and even in Pennsylvania, there's some cow-calf, a lot of stocker operators, but there was no feed yards. I'd never seen a feed yard. So Rusty and I met in Kentucky. We moved to Ulysses, Kansas, and I worked at Grant County Feeders, and my first job was driving a feed truck. I was a management trainee, but I was driving a feed truck, and so my dad's a mechanical engineer. He's proud of his daughter having a master's degree, and I'm driving a feed truck, making $20,000 a year. So anyway, from there, we were fortunate enough to decided that feed yards are, pretty interesting, but we really like the cow-calf, so Rusty and I moved to Beaver, Oklahoma, and that's where we met the Gardner family. So then we've bounced around. We've worked with a lot of good people. Recently, we were able to purchase the cow herd that we've been managing and lease the ground and own it ourselves and have a grow yard operation also. So
I think, again, you represent a lot of the producers that are in here in terms of being a commercial cow-calf operation, and probably a lot of them in here that also, they're making cow herd, and they ultimately are going to feed some of those cattle and are selling those cattle on a premium-based grid. So how do you balance the genetic selection that you put into your herd, the genetics you put into your herd to kind of hit all those different targets that you might be looking at?
it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this the other day, and I know I read a quote that Mark said. He said, we just do the same thing year in and year out. And in all the years we've been working with cow-calf, honestly, my selection hasn't changed. I still look at milk and maternal height first, keep that cow fit in our environment. And the benefit of gardeners is all that other goody stuff, that traits of economic importance come along with those bulls. And so that's what we started with, and thinking back to, we used to just have weaning weight and, yearling weight EPDs, and now we have all this carcass, and, the method genetics, those indexes make it so easy. You look at your ROI, and that encompasses what you need. And you just look at the genetic improvement year in, year out, you just do the same thing every year.
Good. I know you've also been really involved from an industry standpoint with traceability and some of the programs out there in the industry. Give us an update on some of that information. You're probably the most well-versed I know of in the room along that line. Kind of give us your vision of where we're going with all that and how it's changed maybe some of this information flow that we've talked about.
The traceability's been really tough, and I'll be honest, I haven't been involved with that in the last year or so. Mark might be able to chime in here too, but I know that's pretty tough. As producers like we are, improving our genetics, it doesn't bother us, but when you talk about some of these guys in, southeast Missouri and Kentucky and the southeast, or I shouldn't limit it to that geographic area, where they're not doing a vaccination program, the traceability scares the crap out of them, to be honest, and it shouldn't. We should be proud of our product, and we should be able to do that. So I think they're still struggling quite a bit with that. The other industry topic I'm involved with is the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and I think that one's catching ground. Sustainability is the buzzword, and that's another thing we shouldn't be afraid of. We do it every day. Y'all are sitting here, you're buying good genetics, you're buying good bulls. We're sustainable because we're still in business. We take care of our land. If we don't take care of our land, we lose it. So, it shouldn't scare people.
Great. So last, we'll introduce our host, Mark Gardner. So he's always interested in challenging everybody. be interviews or questions along the way. So it's kind of fun to ask him a question every once in a while now. But so Mark, you hear the different perspectives of the different segments here, and how does Gardner Angus Ranch keep genetic inputs for these different segments of the industry? How do you keep that in the right balance and the right progress moving forward?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think it's always evolving. But, I mean, I'm sitting here enjoying all this, just wanting to learn and just go on over. It kind of reminds me riding around with Henry all the time and listening to these smart people. And Shannon, I can say this. I think, you know, where we rank the curve, the bell shape, I mean, that's the top of the curve right there. So, I mean, this lady has done everything, but not to get sidetracked with all of these guys. I mean, it's like, it's being curious. And what makes money? How does this work? Randall, how come those calves that we bought from southern Oklahoma, how come they're getting sick? And, well, they're not eating, you know. They're all running to the back of the pen because they've never seen a human before. And hey, Dawn, what do your guys want? I mean, Kendall, do you treat the average cattle, do you feed them the same as you know? And, I mean, we got one of the pioneers in sharing data right here in front with Sam Hands, and he taught us all these things, and like, you know, well, you can do a vertical mixer, and I don't know how to do that. So I'm bouncing around, but my mind is always darting that way. And it's like, what makes money? How does this work? You know, and really, when you were talking about those different segments, all of you, you know, I've always said that the cattle business is actually pretty simple. It's a three-legged stool. You know, first and foremost, let's give them something to eat. And then second, you know, and I can't not do a vet joke, you know, but, you know, I slept with the most wonderful vet in the world last night. And, you know, my other vet friend right over there, we've been partners one way or another since 1979. So the second part of that stool is giving them a herd health program. And then, ding, 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 here's where we come in. Let's have some genetics that are prepotent that can add some profitability to this. And, you know, when we think about the seed stock business, and I seed some of my colleagues from there, I mean, Eddie and Karen, you're over here, and I think about growing up, and I'll start talking about the Wildcats, because when I talk about Henry, I get choked up, but you know, it was a con back in the day before database systems. You know, he would talk about the blue buds and this cattle, and oh, this is a really good one, and that's all good. That's how we got excited. But when you look at the best linear unbiased predictions, I wish Dr. Sally was here to where we could pick on her, but those systems that allowed our family to be here, we ain't seen nothing yet. And so when we look at trying to create cattle, and you know, we just talked earlier about some calving ease or whatever, and I always tease my boys, it's like, you're gonna be better, Grant, all of them, all my crew here, it's like, you're going to be better at me in most things, but you'll never be as good as we were at pulling calves. And why were we so good at pulling calves? Because, damn, we pulled a lot of calves. Well, it's an Angus bull. They should be all right. And when we look up those Angus bulls in 1981 and 82, and one of my real heroes was Carlton Corbin. And there was a bull called Grand Total. And Grand Total today, I think he's a -7 on Calving Ease Direct. We pulled every single one of those. And so when we look at that and we look at that information, and you know, and we look at all these things, we were trying hard. We were on a tricycle in 1980 and 81 when we got those first database systems. And we look at, I mean, Randall and I talk a lot, all of us talk a lot, but like, you know, we used to think a one marbling was really good and a one ribeye was really good. Well, we've said it in some writing and things, and so, I mean, some of them will say, you know, oh yeah, marbling, that's maternal, and it's going to hurt that. Well, that's not true. There's no correlations with that. It's .00001. I mean, I got the MBA here in animal breeding, but marbling's free, and we didn't use to, I mean, it's Angus, it should be Calving Ease, it's Angus, it should have marbling, it should be great. Well, they're not all the same if you don't design them that way. So I'm bouncing around here, and I'm taking too much time to say,
We ain't seen anything yet. When we have the genetic predictions and we have the genomics, we have the DNA, we have bulls that have just frozen their first semen that will do things that we have never, ever seen in my lifetime. And John Crouch would always say, like begets like. Well, we're getting ready to roll. And so all these things that we put together with that three-legged stool and having that genetic component, instead of just saying, he's a great one because I love him, because he's pretty, because he did this. I mean, this is what his genetic profile is. And I had a good discussion with somebody today. They were talking about phenotype. And for all you K-Staters in here and all you K-State livestock judging team and Oklahoma State and all, I mean, we can do the phenotype thing. And, you know, shocker of all shocker, I judged for Kansas State, and by God, you're supposed to win. And we were fortunate that we did. I can do the phenotype all day long. But Henry Gardner used to say, you know, let's give them a job description, and they can look however they want, as long as they complete that job description. And that made a lot of sense to me.
So has the job description changed in the last 30 years?
I'll start on that. I can remember 15 years ago, 1,250-pound steer was done. Fed them 120 days. Now, Mark, with their work and what they're doing, they're weighing 1,500 pounds. You know, it'll be yield grade 2s and 3s, majority upper choice to prime. I mean, it's just a totally different animal. And a packer likes them because they fit their box. You know, if that animal carcass is 950 pounds, it costs about the same much as a 700-pound carcass to kill that animal. So everyone's producing more pounds, and these guys are, Mark is way too modest on what they've done. You know, they really work well for this system we're working on. Tremendous grid cattle.
And I like to call it acceleration. You know, I mean, you get that big wheel rolling. Well, we were trying, I mean, how many of you remember Tehama Bando from Select Sires, Old Traveler from ABS, and go a few years later, I mean, Scotch Cap from Select Sires. Those were the great bulls of that era. And they can't even touch the bulls of the 90s, let alone the early 2000s. And so when we look at that opportunity, has it changed? I mean, Shannon said it very well. We keep doing the same thing. You know, here's Roy Wallace 101. Roy Wallace 101 was, you know, you keep birth weight under control, you keep stature under control, you select for as much growth, efficient growth in between that, as you'll never get out of balance. And then you do that with superior end product merit and maternal function, and there we go. And when I was first learning from him, and Roy Wallace was the head of Select Sires from the 60s until he passed in about 08 or 09, I lose track of time, it was about 08. And, you know, he and Dad used to go round and round because he'd always talk about, you know, correlated traits. I'm getting outside my skis here, we need Sally and Shannon, but those correlated traits, all that means if you've got a higher birth weight, you're probably gonna have more growth. And it's like, Mark, you cannot have light birth weight, high growth, moderate frame cattle. And Henry Gardner, and they had a great time just going at it all the time. They go, you know, Roy, how many Roy Wallaces are there that are nuclear physicists that can also run a 9-second flat 100-yard dash? Well, he said, not there very many. And he goes, but is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. And when I say we, I mean we as an Angus breed and Angus breeders. In the early 1990s, our quest and what was changing was, you know, we've got growth, but they're getting a little bigger, and the birth weight's getting a little more and more and more. We need more calving ease, we need less stature, we need more marbling and muscle. And, you know, that was when that big debate was coming with Roy, and Dad is like, you can't do both. And we said we can. Let's identify a population that will allow that. And so, you know, many of you remember EXT, God bless him, and those of us that lived through it. But EXT was one of that original performing, and for those that don't get the joke, they were wilder than, they were very wild. And, you know, about pulling calves, you guys don't know what wild is. They talk about this calf or that calf, but they were wild. But they wanted to live, by golly. And then 6807, Traveler 6807, a son of Old Traveler, you know. I mean, and he was a very moderate frame. And then there were some others. I mean, Precision was in there, but Traveler 6T6. And there were some bulls. In that genetic prediction in about 1991 or 2, they looked like low birth, high growth, moderate frame cattle. Well, they ended up being that, and so when I say we, as a breed, in the Angus breed, we found that population, and I would say EXT 6807 and Precision did that pretty well. Then we expanded that population. If you were to sort them back by 1994 out of the database, they were the only 3 bulls out of nearly 3,000 bulls in the database. If you were to sort those same specs today out of that same 3,000 head of progeny-proven bulls, you'd get 1,000. And so that acceleration comes from identifying that population, expanding that population, and then taking the best from that population and rolling on. And that's exciting. That's what that acceleration's all about.
Hey, Bill, I have a question for you. 30 years ago, how often did you hear end product merit?
30 years ago, I heard it quite a bit because I was traveling down here as a regional manager, and so I got to hear about it quite a bit. It was kind of foreign to a lot of people, though. Yes.
But that's what I was thinking. You're talking about 30 years ago, the change in how many producers end product. Well, no, I'm selling my calf at weaning.
Yeah, and that's what, I mean, I guess referring to Don there a while ago, I mean, at that time, everybody was so singly focused on what their profit potential for their operation. You didn't care what happened after they left the driveway. And as long as you got them marketed and you made money on it, there was very little thought process that, hey, somebody's going to eat all of these at some point in time. And so I think that's been pretty neat to see that occur. And Kendall mentioned it. I mean, you take a program like CAB and just the impact that it's had on the consumer public, but then how that is filtered back and fed back all the way to the seed stock operations and commercial cattle producers to recognize value that's out there in the industry and how that can be captured. And so we've seen some real key things along the way that have helped to really change things. Randall, I mean, you work with through your practice, work with a lot of commercial cow-calf operations like Shannon. I mean, how has genetics, the focus on genetics, changed in the last several years as you view that and the people you work with?
So I have a discussion with people, and I tell people often, I talk more about genetics and the choices that they have and the influence that they have using genetics rather than which IBR vaccine to use. And I think that it's a unique operation, a unique relationship that we often have, and I look at the Whartons as a prime example. Is, you know, I don't tell anybody what to do. I just have learned to ask a lot of questions of what are your goals, what do you want to do, what are your resources, and then I might ask the next question, how are you going to get the most out of those? And we talk about breeding programs. We've talked about whether it's synchronization or maybe synchronizing all of their heifers and then feeding the rest that don't choose to conceive. You know, when I was first out of veterinary school and first came to Ashland, Kansas, we would pelvic measure a lot of heifers and they say this one's going to breed, this one's too big, this one's too small. And today with genetic choices of Calving Ease Direct, we can have a better influence on which bull we choose, and that's sure a lot easier on my hand. And I think that in some ways, our relationship to see those people that are winners at the end of the day, whether they sell them as calves, whether they sell them as feeders, or whether they participate in a grid marketing, or whether they direct sell to consumer. I was just talking to a gentleman today that wanted me to buy a couple bulls, and he's told me he sells 300 carcasses a year to people. And I said, so how have you done? His voice sounded a little bit older than mine, maybe yours. And but it's about relationships. And he has relationships with people. So all of us, when we're in the beef business, we think, well, it doesn't matter. We don't need to have relationships. So I think nobody cares about the story of their celery. But if we become direct marketers of our beef and we have more confidence in it because of the genetic choices that we made, then then we know that not only the story of our beef is good, but we know the product is excellent, bar none. And I think we have all sorts of opportunity in this world when we have used the right kind of genetics to succeed.
Is there any questions out in the audience? I guess we don't want to hog everything up here.
So to Dawn and to kind of kindle both of you, our industry's been faced with the challenge of the implant issue going to be happening here in June of 2023. Obviously, Synovex has come out and they have put it on label that we can now be able to use their implant and be able to do one implant on intake and be able to re-implant through Synovex and their label. How is that going to change the industry and the idea that maybe we may see more program cattle now? Is that going to change at all? Going to that for that natural source program?
GAP's not gonna allow it. I mean, I don't see it happening, I don't know.
I guess kind of the second part of that though is what can producers also do to help us at the feed yard level in order to get the maximum amount of carcass using implants, utilizing that. Obviously, we will switch to Synovex instead of our component most likely. But I guess for someone looking to try to help out, what's the best thing that they can do?
Well, for you people who know what Ryan's talking about, after with 1st of June, we were not allowed to reimplant cattle at our operation. Now they can be implanted coming into our operation till we reimplant, but certain companies haven't gone forth and did the due diligence, and Synovex, like you alluded to, they are allowed to reimplant when the cattle get into our place. Well, we're going to switch to Synovex, of course. We're not going to really change our program. But if you're using a component product or somebody else, you have to have that animal implanted before they hit my place so I can reimplant them. Unless they weigh 1,000 pounds or something, we probably won't reimplant. But Synovex has at least done the work and gotten certified where we can use that product, and that's our game plan, is switch to Synovex. Just don't really want to change our mode of operation.
You were asking about program cattle. Are you asking about NHTC, Natural, and GAP? Well, they can't be implanted.
Right, so do you think there'll be any more cattle that try to hit for that source, knowing that there's an implant issue out there? Will there be more people that switch to going that natural route?
You know, 20 years ago, especially when we had natural by affidavit, I can remember Superior's catalog coming out and one cell, and there's very few natural cattle in there, and then all of a sudden the natural cattle were $20 a hundred higher than the commodity cattle, and the very next catalog, 90% of were considered natural. And it's the story I was telling you about Buster a little bit ago. We had direct orders down from Leslie and Jennings. You verify. You do your schoolwork. I think it went kind of like, I said, Mr. Welcher, do you understand what natural means? And he said, son, I have been selling natural cattle since 1972. I have forgotten more about natural cattle than you'll probably ever know. And I'm like, who in the hell is this guy? But anyway, case in point, now that we're third-party verified for all that, I've only got one outfit that'll still take a natural by affidavit, and they're out in Georgia. That's a whole part of natural is non-hormonal, or NHTC is for Europe, non-hormonal treated cattle. Natural cannot have any antibiotics. NHTC can. GAP is not going to allow any of that. I mean, the vaccinations, yes, but as far as antibiotics or implants or ionophores, animal fats, animal byproducts, none of that could be fed or administered. So I don't see that.
You know, Ryan, I think that's a great question, but Randall and I and others often talk about all this is just a math equation. Mm-hmm. If there's really a demand-driven market there for more of those natural cattle, then they'll see more of them. And I can only speak to my experience through U.S. Premium Beef and National Beef, and that's 25-year anniversary right now, and that's been flat. We have not had any growth in demand on those natural cattle, and it's pretty flat. And you know, if we think about Uncle Larry Cora and folks like that teach us in school, we can't give up that 20% efficiency. I mean, some people can, but it doesn't fit us or most of our customers to be able to. So we need to use the tools that we have, and it sounds like we're going to all Cinevex, huh, Dr. Spare?
No.
Okay.
So the part of that regulation that says that if you have a calf crop, you can implant with Revelar G. When we reimplant at a different time period in a growing phase, we can legally, once we have those calves weaned on our place, we can implant those because they're in a different growing phase and no one's going to pick on us. They're not going to come to us, but they're going to watch feed yards. And my conspiracy theory is that Zoetis put the government up to this so that they would have a monopoly on the sales. So you're giving up pounds every time we don't implant. Just think of it this way, it's 20 pounds for every time we don't implant. And when we think about what feed costs today, our feed efficiency needs to go up, and we can't not implant. Now, the good thing is people will say, well, people won't buy my cattle if they're not implanted. That's not a true statement. They won't buy your cattle if you haven't prepared them for the next zip code and you haven't made the right choices from a feeding standpoint, health standpoint, genetics. And we can create our own demand. And those cattle that have been implanted are still going to lay down marble intramuscular fat, particularly if you have, you know, look in this catalog today, you have 1.5, 1.8, and Hometown was 1.8 3 years ago, and he was just one of a few. Now look how many we have above that, and we can put the pedal down and continue to use those choices, and that's how we're going to be sustainable. And I just really encourage you to make those choices to help either yourself or the next person to help your cattle succeed. But implants aren't going to move the needle much because people will say, well, if I don't implant them, they won't marble, or they'll marble better. That's not really a true statement. We may move that needle just a little bit, but not towards the end.
Any other questions out there? So Don, if I'm kind of a middle-sized cow-calf producer, what do I need to do to best get my cattle marketed, besides calling you? But what are some steps that I can take to help get you the information that you need?
Well, first of all, I'm always going to want to know the vaccination protocol in your mineral program. I'm going to want to know the genetics on the cattle. When you say middle size, is it going to be a load lot? We're going to have a mixed loaded cattle? What are we going to
Is
do?
a load lot enough today?
It's actually gotten more difficult to sell one load than it is two loads. I can remember when I first started with Crossroads, we could sell a split load with no problem. Now, you can't hardly sell a split load unless they're going to a corporate, because they'll take those cattle and they'll blend them with other cattle, and and even those guys don't want a split load anymore. One load deals aren't hard to sell at a corporate yard because they'll take all the cattle that are coming in that day. They'll weigh those cattle, type and kind, and build pens, as they call it. People like Sam and Kendall and these guys, Sam's got one I'm not so familiar with. A few one-load pens. A lot of my Nebraska yards, which are mudded in like crazy right now, but there's not a lot of those that have one-load pens anymore. And so some of the issues that we deal with are, well, all right, Don, I'll take that load, but how can you get me another load to go with it to fill my pen, or can you get two more loads to go with it? How, like and kind. That's when you're selling top-end genetics. It's not as easy to just go out there. Oh yeah, I've got these over here and these over here. It's not as simple. A lot of things that I've learned or found in earlier on, I made the comment Southern Missouri. I hope nobody took offense to that.
There's some people here that'll probably talk to you after we're done.
I wanted to clarify myself. There are some southern cattle that are very good, but if you get south of I-70 about 50, 60 miles, it's like the vaccination programs change. There are some very good operations in southern Missouri and Arkansas.
He's trying to back out, Kevin,
I'm trying to find a
backpedal
back
here.
door around here that I can, I run a little slower right now. But no, where we pull cattle. You're not helping, Randall.
So you keep talking about, you want to know about genetics. What do you want to know? You just want
I
them
wanna
to
know
just
the
tell you
bloodline.
that they come from gardeners?
No,
Or you want to
no,
know
I'll call other seed stock operators too and ask them.
do you look at EP, you want to know
I
what
look
the
at the
EPDs
EPDs,
are?
I look at all of it that I can. The favorite thing I like to get is obviously the carcass and feeding data. Because, I mean, when I can sit there and mark that out as far as who's they were and stuff, I mean, the pertinent information, and send that to my feed yard and say, here's how they performed last year, you know, or here's 2 years worth of, you know, and that's why we want what we want for these cattle. I can see that now, you know. A lot of the feed yards that are concentrating a lot more on gridding their cattle will know the, you know, Basin or Keneally or Gardner and different ones like that, and ones they want to go with, ones they want to stay away from, you know. And especially my guy in South Dakota, he's a fanatic on that, which I can understand why, you know.
Bill, I have a question, thinking about it, but we're very fortunate here on the ranch to have a lot of young people come through here, and oftentimes from different backgrounds, but they have an interest in agriculture, and maybe Shannon can speak more to this, but also the whole panel. I'll throw the question out. But how does some young person sitting in the room tonight that wants to be involved in agriculture and to attain what your family's done, Shannon, but how do they go about getting their foot in the door and moving forward down that path?
I think stay humble, hard work, and perseverance. I mean, funny story, when I graduated, I don't remember what year it was, from University of Kentucky, the feeding industry was awful. I mean, they were going through some really tough times. They're losing, a lot of money on fed cattle. I sent out 100 resumes and I got 2 responses. But I didn't let that deter me, because that's what I wanted to learn. So I took those 2 responses. Luckily, I got 1 job and I drove a feed truck. But no matter where you're at, you can learn something. And don't look at it like I'm above doing this, Do it. You don't know what you're going to need to know 20 years down the road. I've forgotten how to drive a feed truck since then, just make sure Rusty understands that. But it's just hard work and perseverance.
Can I add to that? I think the other word that I like, and I think it's been mentioned here, but you got to be curious. Why does it work that way? I encourage when we have young veterinary students come through, and I'll ask them a lot of questions, and then I'll encourage them to start to ask themselves questions and ask other people questions, to always stay curious. And I think when we're curious, then we become more engaged. Henry helps you be curious, didn't he, Greg?
Brad?
Mark, you made a statement that you remember back when EXT and Precision in 1680, there were 3 bulls that fit that low birth weight growth and had some in-carcass merit, which we couldn't probably test for as much then. But you made a comment that now that you think there's 1,000, and yet when I look through the seed stock sale catalogs and that, I'm still kind of appalled that it doesn't look like very many are looking at in-carcass merit. And I guess, as an industry, how do we, those of us that think that we maybe have it figured out, or at least what we think we do, and those that don't, but I guess as an industry, what's it going to have to move that needle to where that becomes, when I open these sale catalogs and go, yeah, there's something there that we could maybe use. When I look through there now, and I'm going to say the majority don't look like they're selecting for in-carcass merit.
Well, that's an exciting question, and it's going to be fun to answer. When I said that we have 1,000 bulls that will match that, look up EXT Precision in 6807 today. You know, I'm saying that, you know, back in the old days, Angus EPDs for birth weight APD, we didn't have calving ease direct at that time. The threshold, the thinking was 2.0 or less for birth weight EPD, rock on, okay? Well, those bulls all kind of hovered around 2, or they were some above and some below, but they were right there. And then at that time, and it seems, you know, some of the young people, Grants and McCall, I see right there, you'd laugh at this, but they were about 80 or 88 for yearling weight, which that was in the top 10% or so for growth. But the real key there was, at that time, we just had mature daughter weight and height, and I think yearling hip height had maybe just started, early 90s, but you know, we didn't want them being above average. So when I say there's 1,000 of them today, that ain't very good. You know, it's not good enough. And so we talk a lot about that curiosity and how do we get there. And to quote Tom Cruise, I don't remember what his character was, show me the money. You know, and Kendall said it very well. These people aren't dumb. And many of you have heard me say before, when they threw me in there with the evil Packer in Dodge City, Kansas to go negotiate the grid, Mr. Miller, what makes you money, Mr. Miller? And he's like, well, that's easy. That's the prime. That's the certified Angus beef. That's the high quality cattle. And you mentioned those 65% choice cattle were really good. I mean, remember now, and I don't know, there's probably national beef people in here, and I know there's a lot of U.S. premium beef people in here. And like, we were pumped. We're the owners. And as John Miller said, okay, we're partners now. What do we need to do? And I'm going like, these are the guys of the highest quality. Sam, they've got an Angus heifer on their logo on the side. I mean, they were the good ones. You know what their percent choice was at that time? I get in trouble, but it's not new. It was 45% was the average, and they were the best ones of the industry. And so we visit and we do all these things, and you think about the Blue Sky Tour of U.S. Premium Beef, and we're selling all this, and then the evil frickin' Packer. Were you fighting with a Packer or what? You know, yeah, you know, just arguing for more dollars. Okay, but we're sitting there, and I said, and so I get my air back, and I say, well, we've got to design a grid that will reward. I mean, producers aren't stupid. If you give them the target with dollars, they'll find it. Okay, so I'm taking too long to answer your question. But I think we've got a really committed group of 470 stockholders and even more people that use the system through U.S. Premium Beef. We would like to think we'd still be here today without U.S. Premium Beef, but Kendall, we would have even more debt than we have today, okay, if it weren't for U.S. Premium Beef. And so, I mean, and you know Quanah as well as anybody, and Quanah's all freaked out about this and that, and and he's from the great Northwest and the West, Rick Machado, I don't see you right now. He's like, you know, and he's hearing all this stuff that I've heard all my life. Well, nobody pays me to have high quality cattle. Yes, they do. And if you're an Angus breeder in here, you know, certified Angus beef's paid a lot of bills for a lot of us for a lot of years. And so it's that curiosity and it's understanding what makes money. And, you know, I don't see Margie here tonight. I see Brian, and I see all these different, I mean, the Wharton family. I mean, my God, Sam Hands helped invent it. And it's like, there's profitability even in the worst of the times. And so I always tell my boys and others, block out the noise, be curious, know what makes money. And that means everything from they teach us in school to tighten your belt. Well, also add value to it. So remember I told you I got my air back with John Miller, and I said, we've got to design this grid to where we pull those cattle through. And he goes, oh my, if we get too much prime and certified Angus beef, it's just worth commodity price. And this is a true story. I was like going, well, then you're going to have to quit being a meathead, and we're going to have to build demand. And he laughed, and we did that. And And we came out of that day, and if you remember, a lot of U.S. premium beef people in here remember, we weren't, it's a little bit like testimony sometimes when, you know, if you've got those average cattle or below average cattle, you're maybe not wanting those value-based systems. But we came out of there, and IBP was, you know, Bob Peterson, the CEO. We said, we'll take the best, and we'll let Bob have the rest. And I can assure you, Bob Peterson taught all of us smart kids from U.S. Premium Beef a lot of lessons. But whether you hated us or not, and I got to debate a U.S. representative because they were trying to outlaw us. We were packer owners, okay? And I got to debate our U.S. House of Representatives about whether we could even be legal because we had packer ownership and we had that. So I'm taking too long to say, and we won that debate, fortunately. But the reason U.S. Premium Beef has been so successful and the reason that so many of our customers have been able to share in that is because we gave them a target. And back to your original statement, Brad, of why don't more people do this? People they own cattle for different reasons. It's a byproduct of land ownership. I've always used the analogy, and I'll pick on east of the Mississippi. I like to pick on east of the Mississippi. You're one of us. So it's like, why do people have cattle? Well, they're going to clean up this acreage. And so they have another job, and they take those cattle to town, and they get the biggest check of the year. And how did they pick that bull for? Well, they like the PBR, and that bull looked cool, so I got a bull like the PBR. So what happens if you go to the sale barn and you take those cattle and nobody will buy them? And there's differences in those prices, just like you saw in Superior last week. But then they become pets. And so I think when you have the economics that will give the professionals the chance to make a living, and I'm really proud of all of our customers and all of the people that we're talking about. The professionals, I'll just say it out loud. You look at the Mayer legacy. Those professionals have found a way to be able to survive in the worst of times with those opportunities. So there's different reasons to have beef cattle. I don't have all the answers. That's obvious. I keep going on. But if you show the example and you show them that trail, and like Tom Cruise said in that movie, we show them the money, then we have a better chance to go forward. And I think if you look at the change in, Henry Gardner, certified Angus beef, it started, and they took them a decade or more to sell 1 million pounds, and then in the next decade wasn't a heck of a lot better. And so when you look at those value-based systems that started to align and pull through better cattle, the last 3, if not 4 years, 1,200 million pounds of certified Angus beef, and that's not the cheap stuff. And so you think back, and you've heard me talk about 5 years to meltdown, Dr. Harlan Ritchie in 1995. That's why U.S. Premium Beef was started, is like 5 years to meltdown. What he was talking about was at the rate we were losing market share, in 5 years, we're not going to be a relevant protein. So Ransom and Cole are 2 years old. I'm 34 years old, and this is my chosen line of work. And I looked, when Henry said something, by God, that's the way it was. And I go, Dad, is he right? He said, yeah, we're in big trouble. Our product isn't very good. So you look at all these things we've been talking about tonight. You look at the change in the demand equation, and you look at how beef has differentiated itself from the other proteins that we were getting whipped bad. National Beef Quality Audit, 1 out of 4 steaks were eating bad. We did it in 1991, 1995, we hadn't improved anything. Why hadn't we improved anything? Because we had no economic incentives. So today, and you take that ruminant animal, you take all these different forages that we can convert that those monogastrics can't into the greatest tasting protein in the world, we're gonna get better and better every day.
Excellent. Dr. Mark?
You guys are all engaged in a diverse set of opportunities, a diverse set of operations, but just to give us another take home, what is a data point throughout your year that you look at to say, hey, what I'm doing is working? And what's a data point that you look at and think, oh, I need to make that better, or it's not going to work? And I don't care if it's a 1-word answer or a 5-minute answer, but as many of you can answer that as possible to give us an idea what you look at.
Whether we can pay the bills and do it another year. Now, what we look at is you know, talking about that end product merit, and look what those premiums, thankfully for U.S. premium beef, you know, we used to get excited about with our cattle, you know, when we started grading 100% choice, that's pretty cool. When we start grading 60, 70% prime, that pays the bills, you know. And so that's kind of what our gauge is. You got to keep improving there every day, get better.
Yeah, I know, Dr. Sparrow, I think we look at every pin we ship. Can we do better next time? And it's a challenge every day. We can only control so many things. That's where I get frustrated. I can't control the weather, I can't control the markets, but we can make sure those cows get fed right every day and they get taken care of every day. And we try and take care of the little things because generally if you take care of the little things, big things take care of themselves. But we try and evaluate every pin that goes out. Can we do better next time? Because we do have a lot of repeat customers and a lot of you guys are out there, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this. And I get it. This guy next time, he's so humble about this U.S. premium thing. People don't remember Future Beef. You remember that? Future broke, you know? This U.S. premium is going to be a good mental gymnastics, I think it was said. And these guys are smart enough to own part of that packing plant. And these guys go and fight for us. For example, there's one packer that pays $15 premium on prime right now. Well, these guys were paying $50 at the time, and I just, you know, because they got a foot in the door, they got a seat at the table, and they're fighting for us. And I tell you what, nothing but respect for this whole organization.
This isn't going to answer that question. I don't have to. But I'd like to comment on something that Kendall does, and it's his attention to detail. And he said it earlier, but it's so many opportunities, and Sam's this way because there's a small feed yard and he has the people controlled. It's how we feed cattle. You know, if we think about the size of the rumen, and if we can control the details, and Kendall has done a tremendous job of feeding cattle correctly. And a benchmark I have in my mind from a feed yard is pin deads and late day deads and all that terminology, I believe, is controlled by how we feed the cattle. And the tendency for big feed yards today is we've got to get cattle up on feed as fast as we can, and they've got to be consuming by 18 or 19 days. Well, we used to finish cattle at 1,050 on heifers. Now it's 1,500. We don't have to get them up on feed. But so my comment is a benchmark that I have in my mind is how many cattle that we put in there, and how many cattle can we harvest, and how many of those cattle do not need to be treated, period. Then your dollars succeed. We know that from years ago, the Texas Ranch to Rail program, we measured if an animal was treated one time, this was in late 1990 dollars. If an animal was treated one time in a feed yard, it increased the cost of production. This is through the treatment cost and loss of production. It increased the cost of that animal by nearly $100. So today that would be even more. So it's our job as to, when they're on the ranch, to really prepare them so that they don't have to be treated, but also know how a feed yard's going to feed them. And in these smaller feed yards that can feed accordingly what those cattle are telling them to feed, they're going to be the ones that are the most successful.
I guess in what I do, it's a little different. I usually look back month to year, also look at the weather conditions, whatever, also look at the last 5-year and 10-year cattle cycles as to, am I improving, and how could I better improve to help my customers gain more value in their cattle? And that's, I've learned a lot in the last 20, 30 years, but it's after I've met Mark and a few other people like Mark and Randall, your dad, and different ones, and kind of sit back and listen the best I can and watch success stories, kind of study what's going on there. There's a sense of being curious and there's a sense of being nosy, and you just got to walk that borderline. I've always been told you don't ask a guy how many acres he's got or how many head of cattle he's got, but you can dang sure ask him how he's performing with them. You know what I mean? What's working for him, what's not. There's areas of the country, and I've talked to Randall about this several times, especially down in parts of Texas and parts of New Mexico, that doesn't seem like whatever you do to the cattle, they're going to get sick on the other end. You know, it's just what's going on down there and why is it happening? And how do our feed yards, you know, it's not really my job to tell them that, but how can we help our feed yards be able to better take care of those cattle if they want to buy them from that region, you know? So that's kind of how I do it.
I think those are all great points, Mark, and I think there's a fine line between curiosity and being nosy. I like that. So it's like oftentimes, you know, Greg and I'd go to these meetings with Dad, and, you know, and it's like, oh boy, here he goes. Because he was always going to be, you know, they would say what you couldn't do, and he would say, well, why not? Why can't we do this? And so I think that curiosity, and you think, okay, you're in a big purple barn in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, okay? So why did we build a purple barn? Well, we need to be able to do our job better. And I think, and well, you were itty bitty too when we built the AI barn, and, you know, happy anniversary, Scott. What was it, 1992, Greg? So happy, 31st anniversary. That's amazing. But I remember asking Roy Wallace and Henry Gardner, were standing up there where our pins were at the old sale barn, and I go, do you think we can afford to do that? And we had a tractor, the only tractor we had. And he goes, do you think you could afford to have a farm without that tractor? How are you going to be able to do these things? And so you can, you know, and Ransom and Cole, they're going to roll their eyes right now, but you got to connect those dots. Okay, and Greg can roll his eyes now. We deal with a lot of customer cattle now, and some of them have seen humans, some of them have not, and we chase them around and we work with them. I mean, there's Scott right there. He'll walk through them all and get them calmed down. You're talking about Buster, and I've got one of my dear friends in southern Oklahoma. We'll leave his name out of it, but I go, Buster, how come? I'll just say it. Hey, Buster, how come your cattle are so much tamer than Shannon's? And he's laughing because he knows. And Shannon's are better now too, because we had that communication, that dialogue. And he said it's really easy. And it's because when Vicente was with him for 40 years before he passed away, every time Vicente fed those cattle, he gets out and he walks through them and he shakes the sack. And so it's those little things, and then and the cattle that ran to the back of the pen and wouldn't eat were Shannon's, and that got sick, and we got Dr. Spare, and so we communicate that, and if we could just teach them how to eat. And you've seen me talk about grids and things up here and show that, and you've seen the spreadsheet. We keep that running total in the catalog. You know, in 2017, there were lots of things that happened there that were interesting. But I gave a talk somewhere before the great event of March 6th, 2017, which was our fire, for those of you who don't remember that. And this guy said, I showed a nice set of cattle from Triangle H that had done everything very well. And this guy says, well, that's nice. Anybody can do that on one load of cattle. And so, I mean, I always go, okay. Randall and I talk about this a lot. Okay, calm down, don't show emotion. But in my mind, I'm going, well, maybe not anybody could do it. But I said, yes, sir, that's true. So from that day forward, I started keeping a chart. And we've always benchmarked all of our seed stocked information, and we look at where we rank within the breed and those percentiles. But knowledge is power, data is power, but if it lays on your desk and you don't apply it to be able to make decisions to know if it works, I mean, and Shannon said it very well. You know, we're going to have a sale tomorrow, and somebody was asking me to buy cattle here recently, Don. I go, Kendall Kay's sitting over there, and he's our partners in all this, and no does mean no, you know. So you have this partnership, and I think, and we've got a lot of young people, we've got a new crew of great interns and such, and we're going to have fun and learn a lot together. But all these guys, I've talked to them a lot, and all of you, and I learn from you, and I listen, what works, what doesn't work, and it may not all work for you, but between your veterinarian, your lender, your customers, it's like, I wake up and like, does that work? Does that work? I mean, why is method genetics so good? Well, Bill Bowman has got, read his deal out there. He can see where the hockey puck's gonna go. But his wife, Dr. Sally Northcutt, I've been using her answers for 25 years now. I guarantee you, she's like, is that right? Is that right? Is that right? She's the greatest animal geneticist of all time. And she gets all mad at me when I say that. But because the people you surround you, and I don't know if Dan Epson said it or not, but Randall's used it for years, people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. So you surround yourself with those people and you stay humble and you work, you clean those waters, you drive that feed truck, you scoop the bunk, and you're going to have a great life. What do you think, Greg? You're over there laughing.
I'm surprised no one's asked me about cost of gains. It's
Now
all.
that you mention it.
What is the, what?
I'm sorry. Well, it surprised me. It went up last week. I don't think it's going to get carried away. I think it is what it is type of thing. But, it's all relevant, though. Just like now, we're selling cattle, at $1.60. It was $1.20. That's about, $600 back in your pocket we were at, and it's costing $300 to put that on. Our cost of gains are running, mid-30s right now, but it's probably going to go up to mid-40s if Mother Nature don't hit us with a blizzard or two. But there's opportunity there yet. And I sold some cattle today, brought back $1.80 on a 157 market. So there's opportunity there. You just got to know what you have, do your due diligence, and keep after it.
And that's that predictability. As an Angus breeder, I've always said, and as a K-State fan, I've always said, I don't care what color they are. It'd be cool if they were purple. Angus cattle aren't better because they're black. Go back to EXT in 6807. They're better because they're predictable, and that's what we, as Angus breeders, did and needed to do, and we're going to do even better yet, and it's going to be necessary.
How much has the cost of gain changed since 4 years ago and up to date?
Well, it was in the 80s. Now it's $1.30 or better, so it's $50 more. But if you put on 600 pounds, that's $300 a head more cost. It's all relevant, but we're getting $600 back. That's what it's all about. Everything's got. We're getting inflation's hitting everybody, and that's why it's more important than ever to know what you're producing, so you know how to market those cattle. Because there's grids out there at work. There's no doubt about it. But you got to have information and knowledge to help take advantage of that.
Well, the cost of gains also went up for the ranch people also. Probably more so than the feedlot.
Well, I'm sure because alfalfa, everything's high right now. Alfalfa's $300 a ton. Distillers, corn, everything is high. So we have insurance, repairs, everything's getting higher.
Interest. Scott, and Stephen and all of you, that's the great question. That's a $20 question. It's going to rain this spring, and that's going to help all of us. Our cost of gain went up on the ranch because we don't have much wheat. This looks real nice out here. That's all we got. So the rest of it, I think that's green. Well, I think this has been a wonderful evening, a wonderful discussion, and I will go on all night with all of you and all these guys, but just thank you so much for joining us. They're not going anywhere. They're all going to be here tonight and tomorrow, but I'm old enough now, Bill, and you are too, and Randall, and all of us, but you guys have been paying attention, and that's been exciting for me, and I was just sitting over here hoping nobody would ask me anything, because this is good stuff, and I enjoyed it. So thank you so much. We will start the sale at 10 a.m. sharp tomorrow. We'll get you out here in good time. Thank you so much. We truly appreciate you, and you are our friends and our customers, and we pledge that we'll keep waking up and saying, well, what if? How about? Well, can we do this? Because as Henry would say, we can do this, so let's get to doing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.